everyone, welcome back to the channel. If it's your first time here, my name is Aiden Potts and we go through math and physics tutorials, as well as how to improve the mindset and learning skills of a student. In today's video, I'm going to be interviewing my old high school English teacher and basketball coach, Dr. Arendt. Dr. Arendt is a PhD holder in philosophy, specifically in the Department of Curriculum, Learning, and Teaching from the University of Toronto. Before his PhD, he attended Louisiana State University for his Master's in English Education, as well as his Bachelor of Arts in English Literature. Currently, he's teaching at my old high school, Crescent, where he teaches grade 9, grade 12, as well as AP grade 12 English. He also has experience teaching at the university level and has spent extensive time studying and researching the development of youth in juvenile detention center. He is extremely knowledgeable in all things that relate to and influence learning, and is someone who I respect immensely. I hope you guys get some value out of this video, and if you do, I'd really appreciate you liking this video and subscribing to the channel to see more videos just like this. All right, so welcome to the show, Dr. Arendt. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Oh, good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks.
We've been talking a little bit, just briefly. I wanted to kind of go through some background on you, so I wanted to go through kind of your academic career as like a student and then also as like a teacher and like kind of an instructor. So you get some details on that, that'd be great.
Yep. Currently I'm at Crescent School, teaching in the upper school. This year I have grade 9, grade 12, and grade 12 AP. Prior to being here, I've taught in a number of different contexts, all in the States. This is the first place that I've taught high school in since moving to Canada for my PhD at University of Toronto. But I have taught grades as low as 5 and as high as postgraduates doing their work at university. And I've taught in inner city schools, suburban high schools, rural high schools, youth incarceration facility. And across the span of 20 years, it's kind of wild looking back on it. The number of places I've been, things that I've seen, contexts in which I've taught, have been sort of incredible. And each of those has sort of afforded me a different perspective on education in the real lived experiences of the kids. But it's also giving me a bit of a longitudinal understanding of the sorts of things that are universal, because a 14-year-old kid growing up in Louisiana, poor and locked up, there are going to be some things that are inherently developmentally similar, cognitively comparable to a 14-year-old kid who grows up in the suburbs of Toronto, right, 1,500 miles and a couple of different socioeconomic classes away.
Mm-hmm. No, and based on those similarities, I think you've probably seen a bunch of students, as you were a student, see success academically, whether it be in high school, university, at the master's and PhD level. I want to kind of understand, what do you think the commonalities and the quality traits each of those students had that made them successful? Do you think a lot of it was natural ability or aptitude? Was it more on work ethic? Was it more on motivation and belief in oneself? What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with what I know best, and that's myself. I was a good student. I went to class and I wasn't disruptive, and my grades were really, really strong. I was, valedictorian in high school. I got the President's Medal for the highest GPA from the year I graduated from Louisiana State University. But I never considered myself a good student. If I look at my partner, for example, she was a solid B/A student at university, but she had to really work. And so if you looked at our transcripts from university, you would say, well, clearly I was the better student.
Right.
But that's not true. She's the better student. Her study skills were a lot more developed than mine was. I got by on natural ability. So for students who really excel, there's going to be some natural talent. You're not going to have somebody who's at the top of his or her prospective class or even profession without having that innate natural talent.
For sure.
But that's not something you can control. So I wanted to try and think about some of the things that you can control. One of them was alluded to in the piece I think we're going to talk about a little bit later, that perception of,
for sure,
learning, right, of the self.
And intellectual ability, yeah.
Right. So natural ability is part of it, but you have it or you don't. But there are things that you can foster that do that. And so I actually learned more about being a student from watching how my wife works than how I did, because I found myself running up against a wall whenever I got to doing postgraduate work at University of Toronto for the PhD. All of a sudden, I found myself like having to read really long articles and sit down and write for like hours a day, and I didn't have those kinds of study skills, and so I actually learned from watching her. And what I identified that worked for me, and that I've tried to work with my students on, is first of all, having the passion and interest is obviously going to be something that sustains you for a long time. So when you're in high school, that's not going to be as applicable as it is later on in university, when you're able to take classes that are a little more aligned with your interests. So being really interested in a topic definitely helps. If you consider yourself like a math student or an art student, then you're gravitating toward those subjects, and you're more likely intrinsically motivated to study and engage with those things. But again, that's not something you have control over. Like you can't really, an art student, and I'm speaking obviously over generalizing here, an art student can't make him or herself a math student, vice versa. So you don't have a ton of control over that. So what is the next thing on the list beyond having the natural aptitude and then having a natural inclination toward a subject? And it really does come down to being able to manage and prioritize. And the more effective you are able to identify the idiosyncratic ways in which you work, and the more industriously and consistent you can apply those to the manner in which you approach your work in the classes, that becomes a huge factor in your success in those classes.
So it's like the study skills and getting better at studying and that kind of stuff, as well as like work ethic. But you said something that I kind of think is interesting. Like you said, some students say they're an art students and they identify as an art student. Like you can't just force them to be interested in math or like, something different. But like for me, from my perspective, like I kind of identified as like always like a math and science kind of student. Never really like was interested in English until I took your classes in like grade 11 and 12. And then I became like really interested in it. And I started we're talking about Hamlet and, relating it to like Wu-Tang Clan and that kind of shit, and like being like really engaged in it. And then I started to apply myself in English, and obviously that like led to better marks, right? And I like progressed a lot in English. And so I think like it might be, you might be naturally motivated to one thing, but it could also be like your role models in your life throughout that. So like my dad was always really interested in math and science, not to say he's not interested in English, but you look at that and then you gravitate to those subjects because the people you look up to maybe put a lot of value into those subjects. So like I definitely transferred over to kind of more of an English mindset. And I think a lot of people can do that. So I'm kind of like wary of boxing someone's, identity in and being like, oh, I'm just this math guy. I have no other reasons to like excel in another subject matter.
Yeah, totally fair comment. Whenever you talked about the, connecting Hamlet with Wu-Tang Clan, for example, for me, and this is something I've actually built my course on more as time has gone on, because I started to see in students exactly the same sort of dynamic you did. And this is obviously something I can do as a teacher, and there are going to be other teachers who do the same thing. But I think there's a lesson in how can you do that yourself to facilitate a growing interest in something.
Right. Like how can you take it into your own hands as opposed to like a good teacher? Right.
Taking Hamlet and comparing it to Wu-Tang Clan. When I was teaching undergrads at U of T and working with them, the skill that I really struggled with, and this is the skill that I've tried to explicitly incorporate into my teaching, is synthesis. That is, how can you take something over here and connect it to over here? So, for example, last week I showed a clip from The Good Place, which is a sitcom on NBC and is available on Netflix, and a clip from The Mandalorian season 2, episode 7. And what we had looked at was like in Hamlet, there's a scene that the entire play is really features a ton of class commentary. And I talked to the students about how Shakespeare uses the character of Hamlet to make commentary about how the privileged and elite social classes, he really condemns them. And then I made a reference to Henry the Fifth. Like I think your year, whenever you had grade 11, we did King Henry V in grade 11. We did. So if you remember that scene where Prince Henry goes into the camp before the battle, and he wants to gauge how confident his soldiers are in him, and he's wearing a cloak and a disguise, and he's like, oh yeah, King Henry, he's great. And everybody's like, yeah, King Henry, for the king, whatever. And there's this like one dude over in the corner who's like, man,
Oh, right.
wait,
I
like,
remember this now.
like, yeah, bleep that dude.
Yeah,
We're the ones who die. He's just
Yeah,
going to get ransomed if he gets caught. But in season 2, episode 7 of Mandalorian, without revealing any spoilers, we come across two characters having a discussion where they're talking about a rebellion battle. It's between like a soldier and the commander. And the commander's like, yeah, that was a really nasty battle. And he goes, wait, it wasn't for you. Like,
right.
my friends died, like not yours. And it's like, it's the same thing. And being able to make something that exists 400 years ago to live today is really important to me. Taking something that maybe you're not interested in and seeing the value in it in something else is really interesting. So if you have a teacher that does that for you, that facilitates that for you, that's great. If not, that's one, I think, concrete thing that you can do to facilitate that yourself, so that you're seeing value in something that you're not drawn towards, but is part of everyday society, and recognize, the importance in that.
No, that totally makes sense. And I think like you touched on like that synthesis. And I remember when I was in AP chemistry at like Crescent, like Mr. Jansen always talked about like distilling information down. Like that's where like the concrete learning happens, is when you're taking like large macro concepts, distilling it down, like making notes and then taking those notes and making smaller notes and going through that. And I think that's such a valuable skill that I don't think people realize. Like,
it really is.
That's like people, I remember spending so much time like making notes and like making them look nice. And then now I'm like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, it's so dumb to like spend that much time color coding all this stuff. It's like the act of learning is like distilling it down. So I think by you looking out and reaching, say you're not interested in like Hamlet or English or something like that, by you actively like looking out to find other sources of media that relate to it, one's going to help you learn it and retain it better, and it's going to make it more enjoyable during the process. So it just sounds like, kind of a perfect storm to actually retain it longer.
Yeah, last year, one of my AP classes used the phrase "Hamlet in the wild," and what they were doing was like they were just trying to find ways where like every day something would happen that was tangentially related to Hamlet, and eventually they started calling it like Hamlet in the wild, because they were like, yeah, actually this stuff is everywhere. But in order to do that, what you're essentially doing is you're going through that same distillation process, right? But it's not even just about understanding the primary text. It's also metacognitive, because you're understanding that work, but you're also synthesizing it with something else. So you're not working with the work itself. You're understanding things that exist outside of the work and being able to make those connections. And I think it helps make schooling live and breathe in a way that transcends, outside of a textbook.
Right. No, I was thinking like through like learning about these like kind of active learning methods versus like passive. So like for like obviously but like for active methods, it's like you actually applying the knowledge, like you doing questions, you making notes, like instead of just like passive methods that's just reading it. And I was thinking like now, like looking back to grade 12 when I was reading English and like reading Hamlet, I thought like I'd read it, but I didn't really understand what it was meant. And like if I were to actually try and recite what I just read, I wouldn't have understood it. And I think by trying to recite it, it would actually have been a lot more powerful. Because I remember when we were in class sometimes, like we'd all be like following along, like watching like Hamlet and like watching the, script being read. And then you were like losing your mind in the corner, be like, what a line. And I was like, what the hell did this guy just say? Like, I have no idea what's going on. And then thinking about it now, it's like, yeah, like I'm reading the words, but I'm not actually like internalizing it and understanding what's happening in the scene. So I think questioning like while you're reading is like a very helpful tool to be like, all right, what's going on? Like, who's that? What's going on? Like, how does this fit into the whole scope of the text? I think that's really helpful to do as well.
Yeah. And so my advisor, whenever I was at university, Karen Cooper, she's a phenomenal human being. And one of the things she kept trying to instill in me, both as a writer myself, when I would try and think about things that were really challenging me, and as well as a practitioner, she like actually teaching, and she always used the word recursive, and what that means is like going back to something that you've already gone through. So the more that you can be recursive about something, the stronger it gets. Because the first time you're going through Hamlet, you're just like, I'm trying to survive this. I just got to know what the hell's going on. Like, who's talking? Who are they talking to? Like, it's like survival mode, right? Your brain goes into this sort of triage thing where it's like, I'm just going to remember the main things. And it's whenever you go back and revisit that you start to have a deeper appreciation for things. things, but
For sure,
but going
yeah.
back to the primary work itself isn't the only way that recursive process happens. So I had another professor, Peter Trifonis at U of T, who was probably like the most brilliant, like real world philosopher I'd ever met. And he had us keep a journal of like when we saw things that we studied about like in real life. And I remember journaling on the subway one day up to campus, and something that he had taught us about post-structuralism I saw in like an advertisement on the subway. And all of a sudden and it was just weird because I was like, I didn't understand the article itself. But then I saw this advertisement because we were talking about the way that the world is sort of generalizable but can be distorting. And all of a sudden I saw an advertisement that did that. And it was like, all of a sudden that article by Deleuze like made sense. If you had asked me, what the hell did you just read by Gilles Deleuze? I'd have been like, I have no idea. But now after this, it was like, oh, that's what it means. And it's making it's that synthesis, that distilling, that recursive process. The more that you can have that stuff be in your brain and you get out into the world, or you're engaged, online or virtually with looking for and seeing those kinds of connections, the deeper your understanding becomes.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. The recursive thing is really interesting because I've kind of noticed that, like going back now and like tutoring kids and like, math and physics and stuff like that. And I've noticed like one, learning something for the second time is like exponentially easier than learning something the first time. Like it's crazy how much more it sticks the second time you learn it. And then again, it's just like this repetitive pattern that like the fifth time you learn it, it's like, it's never going to go away kind of thing.
Nope.
And so I've definitely noticed like learning how to teach or like being able to teach someone material is so important. So like if you have like a kid, or like a younger brother, younger sister, and you're a couple grades older than them, it's not going backwards by teaching them something in like a previous grade. Like if you're in grade 11 physics right now, by teaching them a small principle in mathematics for like grade 10 or grade 8 or grade 9, you're going to see the connection, and that connection becomes like so powerful the more you do it. So I think like the aspect of teaching is such a overlooked like method to actual learning. Like it's definitely not utilized enough. And I think if kids could start like learning how to teach and like actually trying to teach, like even trying to teach their parents, it'd be so beneficial for their own learning.
Yeah, I have parents who ask me a lot in parent-teacher interviews, what can I do to help? And a lot of times they're like, they'll preface it by saying, I haven't taken English in a long time. I haven't read this work in a long time. Right. And they think that, like I have to read the work so I can do it along with the kid. And I'm like, no. And then they're like, he never wants to show me his work, or she never wants to show me their work.
Right.
So I don't know how to help. Like I haven't read the book in a long time. They're not sure. Okay. So then just talk to them. Like that's all it is around the dinner table. Like, what are you reading? Where have you noticed it somewhere else? What have you talked about in class? Do you see any connections with anything else? Like just engage them in that process. And that's supporting it.
And those are general questions. It's not like those are specific to text or material. It's like, have you seen this anywhere? It's like you have to have, the kid has to like think and be like, have I seen it anywhere? And kind of understand like the real world like application of it.
Yeah. So one student that I have right now who is reading a text that I don't know anything about, and I'm still able to have a conversation with him because I can ask him probing questions about like, what do you think? I mean, things like, summarize the book. Well, summarizing is a really important skill.
Right.
Being able to identify what are some themes, what are some character motivations. Like studies show that students who engage with fiction have a better understanding of empathy and character and people than those who do not. And you're talking about, because authors who are really good at their craft create characters that might as well be real.
Right, and evoke emotion.
About them, you're having an authentic engagement with a character. I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to be the same as knowing somebody in real life, flesh and blood, and encountering with them, but it serves a lot. It's a lot more accurate than relying on a stereotype or a generalization that you'll see perpetuated in mass media, for example.
For sure. Yeah. So that like, there's so many different tactics to learning. I think they just haven't really been, I guess, fleshed out or like taught to the general population of kids going through education. Like I think I have this appreciation for it now because I've kind of gone through engineering, and I kind of understand how to learn and have some confidence in myself. And that's kind of where I want to like pivot this is I think a big thing is like self-confidence and like belief in yourself for learning. Like I think back to like going into engineering, I wasn't very confident. I was like, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. Like I don't know if I'll be able to keep up with these kids. And time again, if I didn't get the problem right away, or like days went by, weeks went by, it eventually click, and I eventually get it. And so now I kind of have this like confidence where like, okay, I'll look at a problem and I'll be like, okay, now I know that I will get it. It just might take some time.
Right.
And having that is so powerful. And like, I realized that if I had just kind of eliminated those self-limiting beliefs back then, I would have been much better off. Because, you know, it's laughable to spell out this situation. But if I was like going through a calculus textbook and be like, oh my God, I'm so bad at math. I'm so bad at math. I can't do this. Like your brain's just going to, you know, not learn it as effectively as it would if you were confident and like believing in yourself. So I think that's something that, you know, you're not like, I don't want people to identify with a teacher that told them they were stupid one time, or to identify with like not getting a good mark on a test and they're like, oh, I'm just not a math guy, or like, oh, I'm not an English person.
Yep.
It's like, well, have you really given it the time of day? And like, did you really try and apply yourself? I think that's such a powerful area. And it kind of relates a little bit to like your dissertation on your, like for your PhD.
Yeah, it's I talk to the kids about the importance of being able to envision, and it's not by any means, you know, my idea, but their ability to envision themselves as something that's transcendent. And so one of the things that I started to implement actually last year in my study of existentialism with the kids was to introduce the concept of facticity and transcendence, which is understanding yourself relative to where you are and where you want to be. And so that transcendence is an idealized aspirational. But if you don't have a vision for that, then attaining it becomes irrelevant because it's not even applicable. And it's funny because as recently as today, man, like, I mean, you know me, I get really emotionally and like worked up whenever I'm teaching and working with kids.
Yeah, for sure.
And so today I was working with a kid and I was like, I don't even know if I should say this because it's going to be like on YouTube, but like I was like tearing up because this kid created something that was amazing. And he was a kid who came into the class and he didn't, like I said, they got their spirits, I think, demolished that first assignment. And
right,
you know, it's a kid new to the school, new to the upper school, and feeling like, you know, my strengths are in these areas. And the first essay, I was like, this is really pedestrian, man. Like you can do better than this. Reach. And so we kept working and kept working. And he produced something that I was like, it was unbelievable.
Right.
But that mindset, he went from like, you know, this is who I am. Like I get the marks over here, and my goal is like here's my math and science marks, and my goal is to move my English mark from here to like here, right? And it's this kid didn't realize, oh, I can do this.
Right.
I'm gonna use an example that I had whenever I was in Houston, man. I taught a book called Wide Sargasso Sea, and I don't know if we did it the year I had you or not. But what it is it takes a minor Caribbean character from the book of Jane Eyre who has a minor but very important role in Jane Eyre, and she's treated as very stereotypically as being a Caribbean mixed race person, as being like volatile and not bright and almost animal-like.
Right.
And so Jean Rees, who grew up in the Caribbean, thought that was an unfair depiction of people from where she grew up. And so she wrote a story that talked about how this character became that way, and that it was actually the oppressive mistreatment at the hands of her husband. And it's a beautifully evocative, haunting, gothic tale set in this paradise, but the life of this girl is anything but. So and it's a difficult book to read, but I had a student, grade 12, and she was like, after talking to her and getting to know her over the course of the day, I was like, look, Erica, I'm going to have you read this book because I think you would really appreciate what the girl goes through. And she read it, and she's like, I started reading it, and I was like, there's no way I can finish this book. And then she read it, and she loved it, and she read it again, and she wrote a paper. Now, this was a student who was getting C's in my class and working for them, to getting a legit A on this paper. And when we talked at the end of the year, she came to me and said that she had always figured she was going to go to cosmetology so that she could, you know, be a hairdresser, and she was fine with that. Right. But she had never thought university. And she said that was the first time where she did something that she felt was academic in high school, and she ended up going to university.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it was really just her seeing herself as that student. It was really about the kid that I saw today, like seeing himself as that student. So that, yeah, it's critical.
That like envisionment. It's cool that you talked about like that transcendence. But yeah, it's like such a powerful thing. It's not just, you know, limited to academics. Like anyone can, if they have the belief and confidence in themselves, they can, like, the opportunities are endless. Like, it's such a corny line, but if you believe you can, you really can. Like, it's one of those things that's so important. And I just don't think, whether it's the, like, educational system that faults it, or it's just like the upbringing. Like, there's so many different factors here, but I think, like, being able to teach and, like, communicate to a kid that if you really just believe in this, your own ability, it can have just, monumental effects in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we talked about that article a little bit. It's basically, believing you have either, like, a fixed mindset, or a fixed level of intelligence, or believing you can develop it. And I was wondering if this did have any, because I, shamefully, I haven't read your full dissertation, because it's
no, it's fun. I don't blame you, man. I don't want to read it all again.
The abstract is really, like, interesting, and I was wondering, like, with these kids going, like, if you could summarize it, that'd be great. But with these kids going through, this tough time, and, like, the media portraying them in a certain light, them portraying themselves in a certain light, like, does that put them down kind of a negative rabbit hole to, influence their life choices from there on?
Yeah. So what they end up with is in this sort of, like, negative reinforcement loop, right? Because
right.
The dissertation that I did was I was working in a secure detention facility for juveniles, in other words, like juvie, youth prison, and I'd worked there and done research there. It was a place that my mom worked for years, and so I knew sort of how the facility worked. I knew some of the people that were there, and I wanted to take a really deep dive into the lives of these kids. And so I worked with 6 kids and had extensive interviews, interactions, engagement, teaching and learning, tutoring sessions. And what I began to realize was that I wanted to talk about, like, the oppression that they felt in prison and what that was like. But the more that we talked, the more that I realized, man, it was not just prison. It transcended prison. It started in their homes. It extended into their communities. It found its way into the schools. It was in the justice system. It was in the justice system, the law enforcement system, justice system after they had, like, got out. It was in their adjudication. It was in their sentencing. It was pervasive. And so what I tackled were the multiple layers of subordination in their lives. Like, it was, for a lot of them, inescapable.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is, like, talking to one of the kids, probably the most incredible thing one of the most incredible observations that I had was one of the kids who chose the name Nemo for himself. And this was a kid who,
oh yeah, you talked about this guy. Yeah,
he was 13 or 14 at the time of the study, and he was a good kid, like, no issues on his disciplinary record, nothing. He got in a fight in grade 8 because his mom had just passed, and another kid was, like, making your mama jokes, and he was like, can you stop making fun of my mom? And he kept pushing it. So Nemo, like, popped him, but that was it. And so whenever I was talking to him, I said, well, like, what do you do? He grew up in a housing projects. And I said, like, what are your goals? And his goal was to be the last name on the list of doors that the cops are going to kick in.
Jeez.
Right? Like, when your self-ideation is that, there's not a lot of growth there. And so part of it are those factors that exist outside. Like, this is a kid who was bright and he was hardworking and he was good, but he perceived himself this way. So there are elements that told him this. And so then there are some things that you can't control. So it really, like, the rehabilitative structure for these kids is, like, where do you have choice? Where do you have autonomy? Where can you maximize some of that? And for some kids, that's going to be a lot of choices. And some kids, it's not going to be very much. But once they start to make those choices themselves, it really does have exponential impact. So, for example, one of the kids, we had a pet therapy session. And so one of the kids went from, like, I don't know what I want to do with my life, to, like, you know what, I've really enjoyed working with these animals that we've rehabilitated at the center and then adopted out. And so then when he got out, he started volunteering at one of the pet shelters, and he was thinking about, maybe a career that worked with pets. And it may not seem like much, but to go from having no vision to, like, 100%. Being engaged in something and then actively seeking out a volunteer opportunity and then maybe thinking that leads to something else, that is huge.
And also, it's like a kind of a snowball effect. Like, once he or she, like, gets to that point and sees that, potential goal for themselves and achieves it, then it's just kind of like, oh, okay, well, like, I achieved this, like, marker or whatever. I could go to the next one and the next one and the next one. Like, it doesn't have to stop. You don't have to like have the wildest dream right away. I think these goals and like this growth can just be continual, and
well, his first goal was like, I want to get, if I can get a job and I can get paid for this, it's like I can move out of the trailer park, right? That's huge. To move out of a trailer park and be able to pay rent for an apartment is, for him, that was like the next step. He's not talking about, being governor of the state or that's an incremental step that is huge. And doing this sort of work enabled him to see that I could maybe take that step.
Right. Yeah, and it's just interesting to see kind of like the two extremes, right? Like, you could have such a supportive environment, and then, once that supportive environment leads to a kid like believing in himself, and then he starts just like knocking off goals and achieving. But, the same way he believes in himself and kind of identifies with this positive and like growth mindset, like you could easily see in the situation with the, individuals you studied, society, poor like situations around their life that they couldn't control had deemed them this life, and then they started identifying that way, and then it just again deteriorated that way in the opposite direction.
But if you talk about the attitude, like when the article, I mean, the two terms that they used were entity and malleable, and those are not terms that I was familiar with specifically, but as I'm reading it, talking about the synthesizing, I go back to Hamlet, as I do with like everything else. Are John Milton, like Milton writes in Paradise Lost, the mind itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. And Hamlet says in Act, well, I want to say Act 2, Scene 2, but I'm actually not sure if it's Act 2, Scene 2, so don't quote me on this. But he says, there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so, right? And those are sort of overly idealistic, but at the root of them is exactly what that article was talking about, that if we can more aggressively and conscientiously attack our belief system about ourselves in terms of being able to grow, that's a lot. It's also really, it's even better if you can be in a school or be in a classroom where a teacher believes the same thing.
Right.
Like I had said before, I think I told you guys was I had taught AP classes whenever I was in Texas, and that's why they asked me to teach AP classes whenever I got to Crescent, because I had those years of experience teaching AP in Texas. But like my numbers ballooned, and I think one of the reasons was because I said I don't like the term AP student, because I would have kids to me and they'll be like,
"No, the AP Academy right here." Like, come on, you're.
Well, no, sorry. I should say, you know what? I did notice that on the YouTube channel, and I was like, that's some good branding, because it's also AP.
Yeah, there you go.
Because applied practice makes AP style exams, but they're also AP, and that AP was like deliberate. So I should make it clear that my criticism in that regard is like, it's not Aiden Potts related. But I never like to use that phrase AP student, because I mean, take you for example. You're not somebody who would have said I was an AP student, like English-wise coming to class, but you absolutely were. And I have a lot of kids who would not be termed AP students by themselves or even their parents,
right?
And yet they take the plunge, and if they're willing to work hard, there are definite gains that are made. But you have to be willing to see yourself as somebody who is malleable, that there is some dynamic potential there, as opposed to something that is fixed, an entity that's not going to grow.
Right, and 100%. Like, it's like you talked about it earlier, but like, your intellectual ability definitely is a factor and like correlates with your grades. I think anyone would say that, but it's not the largest factor. It's not like the causal factor, like not by a long shot. And so I think like,
it really isn't.
When I look at myself, like in grade 12, I was like, I didn't take like AP Calc or anything like that. And it's like, because I didn't identify with an AP, as an AP student or whatever, but I went into first year engineering, and it's like, that's AP Calc. Like, it's like, I had to learn it sometimes, so it's just the delay of it. So no, it's so interesting to kind of hear that, because I think a lot of people just assume like, oh, like those are like the smart kids, those are like the geniuses, and it's like, no, you could be that if it's just going to make me take a little bit more work, but that's not something you should shy away from. Like, that confidence you'll get if you do achieve that goal is going to be invaluable for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's being able to see that in yourself becomes really important. And look, man, it's a plague for postgraduate work, the imposter syndrome and getting into a situation. And a lot of kids feel that way. They're like, I get into a room and I think I'm probably the dumbest kid in the class. Maybe that's true. Maybe like somebody has to be. It might be me, I've certainly felt the dumbest in a lot of different
For
situations.
sure.
But you don't want to be grading or marking yourself relative in an absolute manner to other people. It's like it's to yourself, right? And if you come in like the dumbest kid or however you want to label yourself, but you grow and you learn, like that's what's important. But kids get so hung up on the labels and what that means to them
and
in
the
formation
performance grade and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so my sister, she'll always like admit to having imposter syndrome, and she's like a doctor now. And she's like, I had a great line from like some comedian. She's like, they had to confront. They're like, do you think you're that savvy and clever that you like somehow manipulated every single administrative board and like passed all these exams by like the smallest degree and like we're able to contrive this like massive heist or like whatever, like this like criminal mastermind thing.
Right.
Like what's more likely, or did you just do the work and pass it? So there's something. There's like a balance of like having imposter syndrome. It's good because it keeps you humble, but also you got to be like, okay, wait, I've achieved some stuff here. Like,
yeah, that is true. I thought about it that way.
Yeah, so it was funny. But yeah, I think we could probably end it there. This has been super helpful, and I hope that some students find this helpful in the future and going on. But yeah, it's great to have you on the call, Dr. Arendt.
No, I appreciate it. And like I said, I'm thrilled and happy to do this. In any way, I think it's really good, what you're doing with students, because I think there's a lot of credibility that comes. Like teachers have this sort of inherent credibility, this professional cachet that is like a teacher and they know about learning. But I also think that it's really important for them to see, whether it's people closer to their age, people who aren't directly affiliated with education, people who come from other fields but are interested in teaching and learning, where they're like, oh, because if I say something, it's gonna hit at a certain level. But for you to go out and do this and say these things, I think hits in more compelling, profound ways for the kids that you're working with. So I hope this takes off and lots of people see and like anytime you think that anything that I've done along the way is helpful, I'm thrilled to be a part of the enterprise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll maybe shy away from the enterprise word just yet, but maybe someday. I'm kidding.
Sorry, I should lowercase e, like enterprise, like not
exactly. Not like an agency yet. But no, it's been great to have you on. It's been great catching up. I'll end the recording now. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I really hope you guys got some value out of it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you liking this video and subscribing to the channel to see more videos just like this. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys in the next video.